Have you ever been publicly humiliated by someone who thought they knew your entire life story, only for them to realize they didn't know anything at all? That happened to me at my cousin's wedding reception. Picture this. A gorgeous venue with crystal chandeliers hanging from the ceiling, a live band playing elegant music, champagne flowing freely, guests dressed in their finest attire dancing on a polished marble floor. I was sitting quietly at a corner table, holding a drink, minding my own business, when my loud, show-off cousin decided to make me the center of attention in the worst possible way. Standing in the middle of a circle of his friends, he raised his voice loud enough for half the hall to hear and said, "Honestly, he's basically homeless right now. Couch surfing, no real place of his own." Then, with this fake, sympathetic smile plastered across his face, he added, "But at least he gets free food at all the family events, right?" The entire group erupted in laughter. Guests turned to look at me, some with pity in their eyes, others with barely concealed smirks. My chest tightened, my ears burned with humiliation, but I just gave a half smile and took a sip of my drink, thinking to myself, basically homeless, with a $5.6 million mansion and a drawer full of keys you don't even know exist. That night, he called me basically homeless in front of everyone who mattered. 2 hours later, I placed my mansion keys on the table in the middle of that same hall, and his entire personality crumbled with the sound of those keys hitting the surface. Let me take you back so you understand how we ended up here. My cousin and I grew up together, and from the very beginning, he was always labeled as the successful one, the cool one, the popular one. He wore expensive clothes, drove flashy cars, and made sure everyone knew about his lifestyle through constant social media posts. I, on the other hand, was simpler, quieter, more grounded. I didn't feel the need to broadcast every achievement or purchase. I lived my life on my own terms, and honestly, I preferred it that way. But in our family, quiet success is often mistaken for failure. At every family gathering, my cousin would throw backhanded compliments my way. He'd say things like, "At least you don't have to worry about property taxes," or "You travel light, you own nothing. Must be nice not having responsibilities." People would laugh, my parents would brush it off, and I'd just smile and let it go. It became a running joke in the family that I was the struggling one, the one who couldn't quite figure life out. The narrative about me was this. I had recently gone through a breakup, relocated for work, and was staying in temporary short-term rentals and sublets while I figured things out. To everyone on the outside, it looked like I was unstable, drifting, maybe even a little lost. So naturally, people assumed I was basically homeless, living paycheck to paycheck, barely surviving. What they didn't know, what nobody knew, was the reality of my situation. I wasn't struggling, I was thriving. I owned a $5.6 million mansion. Yes, you heard that right, a fully paid mansion in one of the most prestigious neighborhoods in the city. I had built my wealth quietly over the years through smart real estate investments, strategic property flipping, and disciplined financial planning. I started young, buying my first property when most people my age were still figuring out their careers. It was a cheap foreclosure, a fixer-upper that everyone in the family laughed at. They said I was wasting my money on a dump. But I renovated it, rented it out, and used the income to buy another property, then another. Over time, I built a portfolio that eventually allowed me to purchase my dream home, an 8-bedroom mansion with a pool, a home office, a sprawling garden, and views that people would pay just to photograph. But here's the thing. I chose to keep my lifestyle low-key. I didn't drive luxury cars or wear designer clothes. I didn't post pictures of my mansion on social media. I lived simply, not because I couldn't afford more, but because I valued privacy, independence, and peace over public validation. At the time of the wedding, I was renting out my mansion to high-paying tenants, while I stayed in smaller, temporary places for work-related reasons. My family never saw me at the mansion, so they assumed I didn't have one. My cousin, meanwhile, loved to mock me. He'd send me messages asking for financial advice, saying things like, "You're good with numbers, can you help me figure out my debts?" But publicly, he'd paint me as broke, as someone who needed help, as someone to pity. And I let him. I let him believe whatever he wanted, because I didn't need his validation. But there's only so much disrespect a person can take before they decide enough is enough. The wedding reception was in full swing. Speeches had been made, dinner had been served, and now people were drinking, dancing, and mingling. My cousin, as always, was the life of the party, standing in the center of a group of friends and relatives, telling exaggerated stories and making everyone laugh. I was sitting at my table observing quietly when one of our relatives casually walked over and asked me, "So, where are you staying these days?" It was a harmless question, genuinely curious, nothing malicious about it. But before I could even open my mouth to respond, my cousin jumped in. He turned to the group, raised his voice to make sure everyone nearby could hear, and said, "Honestly, he's basically homeless right now, couch surfing, no real place of his own." Then, with this fake sympathetic smile plastered across his face, he added, "But at least he gets free food at all the family events, right?" The entire group erupted in laughter. Guests turned to look at me, some with pity in their eyes, others with barely concealed smirks. My chest tightened, my ears burned with humiliation, but I just gave a half smile and took a sip of my drink, thinking to myself, basically homeless, with a $5.6 million mansion and a drawer full of keys you don't even know exist. That night, he called me basically homeless in front of everyone who mattered. 2 hours later, I placed my mansion keys on the table in the middle of that same hall, and his entire personality crumbled with the sound of those keys hitting the surface.
You might be wondering, how did my entire family, including my cousin, remain so clueless about my financial situation? How did nobody know that I owned a multi-million-dollar mansion? The answer is simple. I chose invisibility. I deliberately kept my wealth private because I valued peace over praise and independence over validation. Let me walk you through my financial journey so you understand how I got here. When I was in my mid-20s, I saved aggressively and bought my first property. It was a foreclosed house in a decent but overlooked neighborhood. The place needed serious work. The roof leaked, the walls were cracked, the kitchen was outdated. My family thought I was insane. My cousin mocked me openly, saying, "Why would you buy that dump? You could have just rented a nice apartment instead." But I saw potential where others saw problems. I spent months renovating the property myself, learning plumbing, electrical work, painting, and basic carpentry. When I was done, I rented it out, and suddenly I had passive income flowing in every month. I took that rental income, combined it with my salary, and within a few years, I bought another property, this time a duplex in an up-and-coming area. Same process: renovate, rent, refinance, repeat. Over the next decade, I built a portfolio of properties through strategic flipping and long-term holdings. Some I sold for profit, others I kept for rental income. Eventually, I had enough capital to purchase my dream home, a $5.6 million mansion in a gated community with ocean views, custom architecture, and amenities most people only see in magazines. The mansion had 8 bedrooms, a pool with a waterfall feature, a state-of-the-art home office, and a garden that looked like it belonged in a resort. It was everything I had worked for, everything I had dreamed of, and I owned it outright. But here's the key. I didn't live there full-time. I rented it out to high-paying tenants because the rental income was substantial, and I preferred staying in smaller, more practical places for work-related flexibility. My cousin, meanwhile, had no idea. To him, I was still the struggling relative who couldn't afford stability. He'd send me private messages asking for financial advice or help with his debts, but publicly, he'd paint me as broke. He'd say things like, "You're too old to be living out of bags," or "When are you finally going to settle down and buy a house?" He had no clue that my bags could easily fit into one of the walk-in closets in my mansion. The irony was almost funny. For my family, home meant something Instagram-worthy, something flashy that you could show off. For me, home was something I legally owned, something that generated wealth, something that gave me freedom. They measured success by appearances. I measured it by property deeds and financial independence. And that difference in perspective is exactly why they underestimated me so completely. After my cousin humiliated me at the reception, I didn't rush into an emotional outburst. I didn't storm over and start yelling. Revenge, real revenge, isn't about losing your temper. It's about precision, timing, and impact. I sat at my table, finished my drink, and made a decision. I was going to reveal the truth, not as a brag, but as a correction. I was going to show everyone, especially my cousin, that their assumptions about me were not just wrong, they were laughably wrong. But I wasn't going to do it clumsily. I was going to wait for the perfect moment, the moment when the irony would hit hardest. My plan was simple but surgical. I would stay low profile for the rest of the evening. I wouldn't engage in arguments or defend myself verbally. Instead, I'd wait for the conversation to naturally circle back to housing, real estate, or future plans. And when it did, I'd make one calm, undeniable move that would flip the entire narrative. First, I prepared the tools I needed. I had my mansion keys with me, a heavy set attached to a distinct keychain with a smart gate fob that clearly looked high-end. On my phone, I had recent photos and videos of the mansion, interior shots of the living room with floor-to-ceiling windows, the pool lit up at night, the driveway with luxury landscaping, and an aerial view that showed the sheer size of the property. I also had a screenshot from a real estate app showing the property's estimated value, hovering around $5.6 million. If anyone doubted me, I could show them proof instantly. Emotionally, I was calm. I wasn't angry anymore. I was focused. I told myself, he made a joke of your dignity in front of a room full of people. You're not going to scream or argue. You're just going to place the keys on the table, show the truth, and let reality do the rest. There's a certain power in silence, in letting facts speak louder than words, and I was ready to wield that power. Later in the evening, after most people had finished dancing and were settling back into their seats, the conversation at one of the main tables shifted to future plans and home ownership. The bride and groom were talking excitedly about the condo they had just purchased, their first home together. Relatives congratulated them, shared advice, and talked about their own experiences buying houses. It was a warm, celebratory conversation. Then one of my uncles turned to me and asked casually, "So, what about you? Any plans to get your own place soon?" It was an innocent question, no malice behind it. But before I could answer, my cousin, who had been hovering nearby, jumped in with his trademark smirk. He said loudly, "Please, he practically lives out of a suitcase, let's be real." He laughed and a few people chuckled nervously. Then he added, "We'll all pitch in for a sleeping bag as a wedding gift someday." More laughter. The attention of the entire table shifted to me. People looked at me with that familiar mix of pity and awkwardness. This was the moment I had been waiting for. I calmly set my glass down on the table. The sound of it touching the surface felt louder than it should have, like the room had suddenly gone quiet. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my keyring, a heavy set of keys with a distinctive mansion gate fob attached. I placed them on the table in front of me. The metallic jingle echoed in the space. People's eyes followed the movement. My cousin stopped mid-laugh, his expression shifting from smug confidence to confusion. I looked up, my voice steady and calm, and said, "You're right. It was getting hard bouncing between places. That's why I finally decided to settle in one spot. 8 bedrooms, infinity pool, home office, private garden. Last valuation on Zillow was about $5.6 million. The table went silent. You could hear a pin drop.
I pulled out my phone, opened my photo gallery, and passed it to the person sitting closest to me. That's the front entrance. That's the pool at night. That's the master bedroom. The phone was passed around the table. People's eyes widened as they looked at the images. Someone whispered, "Is this really your place?" I nodded, bought and paid for. My cousin's face went through a series of changes: confusion, disbelief, embarrassment, and finally forced laughter as he tried to save face. He said, "Oh, come on, stop joking, you're messing with us." But one of my aunts, who had just looked at the photos, shook her head and said, "No, this is real. I recognize this neighborhood. This is one of the most expensive areas in the city." Another relative pulled out their phone and quickly searched the property online, confirming the valuation. The mood at the table shifted entirely. People who had been laughing at me moments ago were now congratulating me, asking questions, expressing genuine surprise and respect. My uncle said, "Why didn't you ever tell us?" I smiled slightly and replied, "Because I didn't need to. My home is real whether people know about it or not." Then I turned to my cousin, looked him directly in the eye, and said calmly, "So next time you call someone basically homeless, make sure they don't have $5.6 million worth of front door keys in their pocket." The silence that followed was deafening. My cousin tried to laugh it off, but his face was red, his confidence shattered. A few people awkwardly tried to change the subject, but the damage was done. The narrative had flipped. I wasn't the struggling relative anymore. I was the one who had quietly built an empire while everyone else was busy making assumptions. After the reception ended and guests started leaving, my cousin found me near the parking lot. His expression was a mix of anger, embarrassment, and forced casualness. He walked up to me and said, "Okay, seriously, why did you have to flex like that? You made me look stupid in front of everyone." I stopped walking and turned to face him, my expression calm but firm. I said, "I made you look stupid? You spent the entire evening calling me basically homeless in front of a room full of people. You didn't just make a joke, you orchestrated a public humiliation. You wanted everyone to see me as less than you." He tried to deflect, his voice defensive. "It was just a joke. You're too sensitive. You could have told me privately about your place instead of embarrassing me like that." I shook my head. "You didn't deserve a private correction. For years, you've made punchlines out of my situation. You've mocked me at every family gathering, made assumptions about my life, and treated me like I was beneath you. Tonight, I just corrected the record. If the truth embarrassed you, the problem isn't the truth. The problem is your behavior." He looked away, clearly uncomfortable. He tried one more angle. "Everyone's going to think I'm a terrible person now." I replied, my voice steady, "Then maybe you should stop acting like one. You don't get to publicly disrespect someone and then demand privacy when the truth comes out. You made my housing situation your content. You made my life your joke. I just showed everyone that your punchline was based on ignorance and arrogance." I took a step closer, not in a threatening way, but to make sure he understood the weight of my words. "From this point forward, my housing, my income, my life, none of it is material for your entertainment. If you want to joke around, joke about yourself. I'm not your free content anymore. I'm not your punching bag, and I'm definitely not someone you get to underestimate ever again." He didn't respond. He just stood there, unable to meet my eyes, and I could see that something had finally clicked. He realized that the power dynamic had shifted permanently. I wasn't the struggling cousin anymore. I was someone who had quietly achieved more than he ever would, and there was nothing he could take away from me. I walked away, got into my car, and drove off feeling lighter than I had in years.
So here's what I want you to take away from this story. People often judge you based on what they can see, not on what's actually real. They look at your current situation, your clothes, your car, your social media, and they decide who you are and what you're worth. My cousin saw that I wasn't flashing wealth, so he assumed I didn't have any. He saw that I was staying in temporary places, so he assumed I was homeless.
He judged me based on appearances, and he was completely wrong. But here's the deeper truth. His judgment of me wasn't really about me at all. It was about him. He needed to see me as less successful so he could feel better about himself. He needed to mock me publicly to boost his own ego. That's what insecure people do. They tear others down to build themselves up. And for a long time, I let him do it because I didn't need external validation. But there's a difference between humility and allowing yourself to be humiliated. I was humble. I kept my success private. But when he crossed the line and made my dignity a public joke, I had every right to set the record straight. Another lesson. Family doesn't give you the right to disrespect someone. Just because you share blood or grew up together doesn't mean you get a free pass to mock, belittle, or embarrass someone publicly. Boundaries matter, even in families, especially in families. My cousin thought he could treat me however he wanted because we were family, but he was wrong. Respect is earned, and when you lose it, you don't get it back just by being related. The most satisfying part of this entire experience wasn't showing off my mansion or proving my cousin wrong. It was reclaiming my dignity. It was standing up for myself in a calm, controlled way and showing everyone that assumptions are dangerous and respect is non-negotiable. And here's the final mic drop. My cousin called me basically homeless to make himself feel like a big man. But when those $5.6 million mansion keys hit the table, he learned a hard lesson. Address doesn't define wealth. Attitude doesn't define success. And the quietest person in the room is often the one who has the most to say. They're just waiting for the right moment to say it. And when that moment comes, it's not a scream, it's a whisper. And it echoes louder than any insult ever could.